Hi, everyone. Welcome to Reimagine 2020. I'm Artur, one of your hosts here. And today we have with us a great lineup of DeFi builders. And what makes this particularly interesting is that this is technically the follow-up to our May panel, which honestly by now it feels like forever ago. So excited to hear about everyone's progress. And as last time as well, discuss generally about all things DeFi. So maybe we just kick it off for those of you who don't know too much yet about DeFi. Maybe everyone we go around and everyone introduces themselves and their project. So should we start from Loong from Ren?
Sure. Hey everyone, my name is Loong. I'm the CTO of the Ren project. And at the Ren project, what we're building is a trustless and decentralized bridge between as many blockchains as we can. And for the last 3 months, we've been focusing a lot on Bitcoin, on Ethereum. Yeah, over the next coming months, we'll be connecting all sorts of other chains together as well.
All right, Deniz.
Hi, everyone. My name is Deniz. I'm the head of ecosystem growth at Kyber Network. And Kyber Network is one of the largest liquidity protocols on Ethereum right now. And it basically brings suppliers with demand, with the buy side and the sell side, and the demand comes from multiple different sources like Uniswap, Bancor, or 40, 50 different reserve managers. And we push this downstream to multiple dApps and DeFi projects and wallets and all sorts of projects that require liquidity downstream. And lately we launched the Kyber DAO a few months ago where we put governance and decisions of the protocol on there. And that's pretty much us in a nutshell.
Awesome. And I'm lost, but I'm JPM, one of the researchers for THORChain, not part of the official team. I'll just help out. But I can speak to what THORChain is trying to build and the technical solution. THORChain has just launched ChaosNet this week and is onboarding the first of the 30 nodes that will run ChaosNet, which is basically hooking up a Uniswap-like protocol to Binance Chain. But THORChain is unique in that it's chain agnostic, so it can be connected to Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the team are going to work on the Bitcoin, Ethereum connections, which are probably about 90% built out, but they just need to be well tested, probably going to Q3, Q4. But you can call THORChain a cross-chain Uniswap. That's chain agnostic and asset neutral.
All right, awesome. And I think, so since last time we spoke, Ren was still in ChaosNet. Since then, you guys have obviously launched the mainnet, and it's really started picking up, right? What do you think, Loong? What's been kind of like the determinant for all this?
Well, I mean, I think very naturally there is a big demand for Bitcoin on Ethereum. I think the growth of WBTC prior to our mainnet launch kind of showed that. And that really picked up when WBTC was added to MakerDAO as a available collateral. I think when we launched, we were sort of serendipitous in our timing, and we launched right onto the back of, I guess, this sort of yield farming craze and the beginning of that. And so I think a lot of the demand for RenBTC on Ethereum has just been the demand for people to access a way to generate yield on their Bitcoin in ways that they just couldn't before. Previously Bitcoin was kind of not tapped into the DeFi ecosystem, and so all these opportunities for generating yield weren't available. And we made that available, and then with I think at the same time, just a lot of attention was drawn to the fact that you could generate pretty outrageous returns for certain moments there using various DeFi protocols. And I think at the very beginning, it was actually interestingly enough, just about getting your hands on WBTC, but just in an easier way. WBTC is very difficult to wrap and unwrap. Most users actually can't do it manually, or they can't do it themselves. And so just the ability to do it through RenBTC and a curve stable pool between RenBTC and WBTC made accessing that a lot easier. But now we are seeing people, putting BTC on Ethereum just to have RenBTC for its own purposes.
And just for reference, what is the I guess the TVL is the best metric we got, right? Like where are you at as of today?
So we're at 100 million. I don't think that's actually the best metric though for a lot of these cross-chain protocols. I think a better metric is actually volume, because I think in most cases, total value locked doesn't really capture necessarily everything that's happening. So our total volume is just under 350 million, or around that mark. So we're seeing, about
this
3
is
to
what
4.
you basically minted and what's been minted.
That's right. Yeah.
And,
sometimes it goes across, and
okay.
sometimes it kind of comes back. So really, the utility of a protocol, you could do $1 billion in volume, but have 0 total value locked. So it's not necessarily a great metric to just look at the one.
Got it. And I guess, and you guys have already started working on essentially the next additions to the bridges, right? Which I understand that Polkadot is next.
Yeah, so we have a whole series of chains that should come out in the next release. So we're doing sort of the next major release for RenVM, and with it will come a whole set of chains, and one of those is Polkadot, specifically Akawa. And
I understand that so you've kind of chosen Polkadot instead of Cosmos. Was there to add to the multi-chain API? Is there any technical limitation, or what was the kind of decision-making process behind there?
We actually do have Cosmos in our multi-chain API.
My bad.
Through the Terra chain, the Luna token, those guys opened a pull request and added their implementation in. So that's there, and will very likely be in this next release as well.
Awesome. I guess let's give the mic to Deniz from Kyber. I think most notably, what you guys have done since then is the launch of the Kyber DAO, which so you guys have almost 1/3 of the token supply is being actively staked. You've given kind of control of the protocol in some parts to the community. How has that been so far?
I think it's surpassed our expectations, because we can see participation rates in other decentralized governance models, like other popular ones, or some like Maker, for example, and participation can be low. The number of voters sometimes per whatever vote they have can be like 20, 30, which is below what we would expect of something that's widely used. Whereas on Kyber, I think in the first epoch, we had 2,500 people vote, which to us is tremendous participation rate. And I think, it's also down to the fact that we're capturing fundamental value, in the sense that many of these new yield farming and all that stuff that we're seeing, people are getting a governance token, which we're not sure what value it has, whereas the rewards you get from participating in the Kyber DAO are directly ETH. So each KNC is accruing hard ETH, so it's much easier to value. You can say, oh, look, that's how much ETH is. Today's ETH market is this much. Whereas on other competitors, it can be a bit more abstract. How much is a Wi-Fi whatever governance token worth? It's so speculative. And I think that's something that's, makes us stand out a bit from the current yield farming narrative and the decentralized governance narrative.
But I guess one of the sides where you guys, it really has been the sort of, I guess, the year of the AMMs and sort of DEXs, right? But Kyber, you guys are not necessarily an AMM sort of pool, or I understand that there was some initiative, or you guys were looking at that. Are you kind of what's your thought process there today?
Well, the way we're actually structured is we're open to every single type of market making mechanism. So we have order book types connected to Kyber. We also have multiple AMMs. Uniswap is connected. That's the beauty of the Kyber structure. So we do have multiple AMMs for reserve teams who want to provide liquidity. It's so much easier just to deploy an AMM on Kyber or Uniswap and then to Kyber, rather than do it manually. So we're pretty involved with that aspect as well.
I mean, Uniswap's been all kind of, I guess, gotten everyone's attention in the last 3 months, and it seems to be this sort of unofficial launch pad of where sort of anything and everything goes, right? Kyber is you guys are kind of like a curated, essentially like a curated kind of DEX, right? That the tokens that are available on Kyber need to be pre-approved, right? So that it gives the customers a sort of some level of security, right? Are you guys also looking at sort of launchpad type of stuff, or?
I mean, not necessarily launchpad, but maybe just more open. Anyone can come and provide liquidity. So if a team wants to provide liquidity and call it a offering or whatever, it's up to them. The protocol really doesn't care what happens on the front end or how you present it. So we do have some ideas. You know, maybe we'll announce, I don't know when we're going to announce it, or we're still in talks, maybe having it a bit more open, a bit more similar to Uniswap, rather than having it purely curated, because there are now like different TCR methods where you can actually verify a token, whether it's a scam or not, using some decentralized method. There's a few different options out there that we're looking into.
That sounds interesting. I mean, yeah, looking forward to hear more.
Yeah.
JP, I think since we last spoke, THORChain has entered heavily into testnet mode, and I think testnet 5 was the last one, and now, as you mentioned, ChaosNet.
Yeah, that's correct. So about 2 months ago, the team started their public testnets, which include being able to have public nodes join and leave the system. THORChain is unique in that it has a very high churn rate of its nodes. So it every 3 days, it will onboard a new node, the node with the highest bond or potential bond, and then churn out an old node because it seeks to avoid capture wherever possible. And high churn rates in its validator set is one of the mechanisms for being resistant to capture. The other reason is because THORChain uses generic Goldfeder threshold signature scheme, which is a synchronous and a live procedure. So you can't have nodes with old keys that will stagnate. So by churning the nodes regularly, you ensure that the keys stay alive all the time because it's a MPC protocol. Ren actually used something quite different, which I'm very keen to get my hands on and check out how it works once it's open source. I've been bugging Ty almost weekly for that, but it's such Ren's
sometime this week.
Awesome. Ren team have built something pretty special, and if it works, clearly it does work. So I'm very excited to see how it works because it basically means that as a site, better can go to thousands of participants rather than have a small signing set. Anyway, so THORChain is in its testnets, and the team just wanted to see that the churning procedure was validated. That the chain could upgrade. So THORChain has got a unique ability that as soon as the nodes run a new version, the whole chain upgrades. No halt is required. And the team pulled off 8 upgrades within a week, just upgrade. Everything from migrating vault funds, changing the KB store, changing the business logic, changing the bridges. But the team kind of fleshed out and proved that the entire system can upgrade as it goes. And there's no kind of like lock-ins. As long as the nodes all opt in to run the new software, then it'll run. So that was a big thing, and it's all been tested. So yeah, this week the team are onboarding these new nodes, but this time around it's real money, real funds on Binance Chain. And the team are probably aiming for $50,000 to $100,000 cap, and then slowly increase it through the millions once everyone's happy. The team don't run any nodes as well. It's all publicly run nodes.
And how many nodes did you guys get to in the last testnet?
So testnet hit 4.2, hit 27 nodes. It's mainly, but it's tapping out at 30 nodes, which is the design criteria for this particular testnet. In order to get higher to 99 nodes, the team have to build out a bit more of an infrastructure to handle large sizes like that. One of that is to shard the vaults. But yeah, so the current testnet is 15 nodes, and the team will launch the ChaosNet publicly when they hit around 15 nodes, 12 to 15 nodes.
Awesome. I mean, super exciting. And but I understand the current for the sales pitch is the cross-chain Uniswap, right? The first ChaosNet will be using essentially the TSS and the kind of the technology infrastructure you guys have built. But at first it'll only be Binance Chain, correct?
That's correct.
And when can we expect I think the thing that the community is most expecting is the Bitcoin and Ethereum ChaosNets, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Bitcoin and Ethereum, like I said, 90% of the infrastructure is being built out, but it just needs, more of it needs to be tested. The interface with the wallets need to be tested. So Bitcoin The infrastructure uses the op return data in order to broadcast transaction intent back to THORChain. And for Ethereum, there's a vault contract where events are registered when a new person deposits tokens, and that event fires off and gets into THORChain. So some of that infrastructure still needs to be finalized, but it's pretty close. Yeah, we believe we can hit multi-chain chaosnet later this year.
Awesome. I mean, this year I think has definitely been something, you know, everyone's been finally the momentum that everyone's been kind of waiting for. Let's dive into another kind of, aside from DeFi, another more and more trending word or term has been Daos. And I think, so as we mentioned, Kyber recently launched theirs. What is your guys, you know, opinion on Daos? And because I think to you, Loong, there is also a plan to launch a REN-DAO, I understand. Maybe we can kick it off and you can share your kind of view and opinion on DAOs, as well as what's Ren's sort of plans around it.
I think like it's a DAO is changing and evolving in exactly what it means, but generally it's some kind of tokenized driven governance model. I think they're inevitable in any serious decentralized protocol, unless the protocol can function so simply that it doesn't need a DAO. You could maybe argue that, you know, Uniswap is probably one of the simplest systems out there, but even that, you know, has some parameters that you might want to control. For example, the fee, just simply, or even perhaps the precise curve that's being used. And so, you know, immediately you need some kind of way to control how people vote. And how people make decisions. And I think one of the biggest challenges was something that Deniz touched on, which is how do you increase participation and how do you incentivize participation and how do you get away from freeloaders? REN is kind of a complex system in that sense because a vote that you make on chain, let's say on Ethereum, may not actually necessarily hold, because at the end of the day, the functionality of the system is in the nodes as our separate network that sort of watches what happens, and they could just decide to not or to ignore the vote. So there's a requirement to understand which parts of the system can be governed by a vote on chain and which parts of the system can only kind of be signaled with voting on chain, where nodes might use the chain and use their ability to vote as a way to signal to each other which upgrades they're happy with or what kind of path or what kind of direction they want to go with. But at the end of the day, they may not actually go in that direction. And it can be very difficult to prove whether or not someone has actually done the thing they were going to say on one chain versus another, especially when you've got an MPC protocol involved. We do anticipate opening to a DAO. We haven't quite seen a model that we're super stoked about yet. They all seem to have some various issues, but I think we're getting closer to seeing some that have been working. I think more recently we've seen how the right kind of incentives can at least encourage participation. We love the idea of creating governance tokens or distributing governance tokens through people that use the system or actively contribute to it doing the thing that it's meant to do. You know, recently with the launch of Comp, you generate that by borrowing and lending. Obviously, I personally think that the way that was implemented was a little bit gameable and doesn't necessarily capture people who earnestly want to borrow and lend for the sake of borrowing and lending, which is ideally the people that you would capture. So I think there's still a lot to be figured out there.
What's your favorite kind of DAO personally, I guess, or is it Comp, as you mentioned, Compound?
I do quite like Compound. I think the thing that I like about it is the directness of the governance system. So, I mean, it was the first one to really explode and it kind of, I guess, drew a lot of attention to yield farming. But it was also one of the biggest protocols to take a step from being centralized to being fully decentralized in essentially one big move. And I think they did a decent job of it. And I think there's very little, if anything, in their protocol, maybe the UI that is now left to the central team. And I think that's kudos to them for being able to achieve that.
I mean, I think these are all, you know, amazing experiments that are being had and sort of that are being made. And over time, we will sort of, you know, everything's being figured out. And I think it's what's crazy about the crypto space. It's just the speed that it goes at. JP, what's your? Sorry, go on, Loong.
Oh no, you guys go.
All right, I was just saying, JP, what's your kind of view on DAOs?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Loong that we yet to see a really good DAO. So I don't believe in just locking up an asset and not having it at risk anywhere and just, stabbing at it in the dark on these decisions. I think that kind of DAO is just pointless. The best kind of DAOs force the participants to put the capital at risk. I'll explain why and how. But two, they are actively rewarded directly and indirectly, directly as in incentives and indirectly as in future success of the protocol for their participation. So at-risk governance is not just locking up your tokens in a smart contract and doing a vote once a month. At-risk governance is an example, staking an asset alongside capital in a liquidity pool. And instead of locking up that asset, you lock up the liquidity tokens of the asset. And then those liquidity tokens represent your proxy of your voting power. Additionally, you can also then have block by block time-weighted influence, so to prevent whale attacks. But more importantly, because the capital is at risk in the pools, it won't allow any other whale or other to be bought out by the community because the voting power is in its liquidity tokens reference to the staked assets in the pool. So at-risk governance. So the decision-making by the DAO members is then immediately felt throughout the system, because if they don't make the right decisions, the right fees, the right incentives, as Loong was saying, it's all about tweaking all the levers that a certain protocol can have, such as fees and whatnot, and gauges for curve or whatever. If they don't make the correct decisions, then it immediately affects the capital that they've locked up in the pools because it's at risk. So that's really important. The second thing is, which Loong touched on, is that you can't just broad brush every decision thrown towards the DAO in the same kind of voting structure. So as an example, there's two types of participants who are putting the capital at risk in THORChain. One are nodes who are bonding, and the bonded capital is underwriting all the staked capital. The nodes run critical software, which produces blocks and decides on the business logic for swapping and staking. So the kind of decisions that nodes should be able to make got nothing to do with the stakers. They're worried about the security and the longevity of the protocol. So by being a Cosmos-based proof of bond blockchain, the nodes form their own DAO, but their decision making is opt-in and running software rather than poking at things in a smart contract. Whereas the stakers have very autonomous influence on the system. Their influence literally comes down to what assets are listed and delisted, and that's really it. Any pool with deep assets will get listed. Any pool with shallow asset will get delisted by the system. So you got to separate out your user members and give them, and obviously at all times have minimal governance. THORChain team believe in as minimal as possible governance as possible. If it can be codified, then codify it. If it can be in a pendulum or equilibrium and codify that, like an incentive pendulum or an equilibrium between staking and bonding or security ratios, then codify it. Don't let that ambiguity be interpreted by the meat space and have constant governance month in, month out. Codify that thing, make that thing block by block. So that's the team's thoughts on governance and how to do it properly and how to do it incorrectly. And today I don't yet see any DAO which I would want to participate in, which has the correct structure that I've just spoken about. There is one or two DAOs bubbling up right now that pursue this structure. I think they will do well.
I think Aave is one which is looking at it like this, where capital does actually get put at risk.
Yeah, at-risk governance is very important.
And you mentioned another thing which I've been meaning to ask is, so these liquidity provider tokens, they become very, very popular and useful. Actually, the kind of use cases of them are becoming kind of more and more elaborate. Does THORChain also have plans to incorporate such feature?
Yeah, liquidity tokens are interesting because they represent they don't represent directly assets. They represent the share of a financial instrument. That financial instrument is a pool, and they own a share of that pool. That pool has underlying exposure to two or more assets. So like a Uniswap pool or a THORChain pool. So the liquidity token is a lot more value stable because if it's two assets, one goes up, one goes down, but the mean is the liquidity token. You need both tokens to go up or down in value for the liquidity token value, redemption value to change. So liquidity tokens are inherently more value more stable in value than the underlying assets. And two, they are yield generating. So if the pool creates volume and fees, then those liquidity tokens have a earnable right on the earnings of the pool. So a yield generating. So these are very interesting things. And I think not only will they be used more in lending and collateral, so rather than collateralizing debt with illiquid assets, collateralize debt with liquidity tokens, because that debt is now yield generating and can be instantly liquidated through the pool by just unstaking in one direction. So very, very, very powerful assets. The THORChain is cross-chain. We believe that the future of, I guess, interoperability across chain is going to be something through IBC, inter-blockchain communication. And it's quite simple. So you can stake your assets in liquidity pools on THORChain, get minted liquidity tokens that represent your redemption right on that pool, and then use IBC and wire it to another chain like Aragon or Kava. And for those tokens, then do other cool things on those chains. So interoperability, composability at the IBC layer is something that is a design space we're only beginning to scratch. And Ren's chain is also perhaps IBC compatible, so there could be something there in the future.
Exciting. And Deniz, you're the only one here with the DAO, and I guess this is leading to my next question. The first vote on proposals that you guys had at Kyber or at Kyber DAO was during an Ethereum congestion period, which is now kind of this is kind of this mosquito bites across every project's sort of life right now. But how have you guys kind of approached this? Voting becoming more and more expensive, and what's your thought process there?
Well, when we were initially designing this whole DAO back in December, when we started, the Ethereum, the fees wasn't such an issue, and we never really anticipated it would become that crazy. Yet back then we did take some key decisions that are paying off today, and that was something very simple: just allowing any voter to delegate their vote to any other address. And we thought, okay, we'll create an ecosystem of pool masters, of different flavors of pool masters, to kind of be attractive for institutional investors, for end users, for the community, for any kind. So if you're part of the Kyber Telegram group community and you're passionate about that, there is a community pool master that you can delegate your vote to. Once you delegate it, you don't have to vote every 2 weeks. You can voice your opinion through Telegram, Twitter, and that kind of builds consensus around that pool master, and it votes based on what that kind of stakeholder group wants to vote on. So then you don't have to pay the $10 or whatever fees every epoch, every 2 weeks to vote. It's basically cheaper system. It's more like representative democracy, and that's how kind of we're getting around that issue. If you're holding tens of thousands of KNC, and the reward you get is much more than the fees, then this isn't really an issue to you. But if it is an issue, you do have 6-7 different options out there.
Got it. And I mean, it's always great to see when there's a simple solution to a kind of difficult problem. Yeah. But how has this sort of state of Ethereum, I guess, or state of gas impacted Kyber as Kyber generally?
I mean, it means that we're talking about layer 2 solutions much more internally now, trying to see what are the other options. There are a few unanswered questions around composability, because for us that was very important. That whole concept behind money Legos, being able to stick things together. But if each one of those is on a different layer, then obviously you can't chain 10 of those within one single transaction. So then what? Should all these dApps congregate around one layer 2 solution? Which of the layer 2 ones are the most viable? So we're still in that exploration phase. I don't know when we'll see solutions, but we're on it as a team.
This is actually something I'd like to discuss a bit more on, and just hear everyone's kind of view or opinion, because I think everyone knows that gas is going to be more and more in demand, and there just really isn't a sort of a really clear solution on the sort of in the near term. How do you guys see this sort of playing out in the next like 6 months, 1 year, I mean, I guess hopefully in 2 years' time it won't be a problem anymore.
I think 2 years is
Too
a long
long.
time. 2 years is a long time to ask the community to wait. I think, I mean, to an extent, I think that it's kind of good that this has happened. I think back in 2017, 2018, there was a lot of hype around alternate layer ones, and I think it's really important that we actually do have legitimate alternate layer ones. I think Ethereum is really the only one that has seen a huge amount of traction with developers to date, or at least with the products that have been built on top of them. But I think that with this recent huge gas explosion, everyone has kind of started becoming re-interested in these projects, and a lot of them didn't go anywhere. They spent 2 years building. It takes a long time to build a proper layer one and to get it right. And I think some protocols have gotten it right. I do think Polkadot is one of them. And this is going to help create a bit of competition in the space, which I think is always good. But also I think that interoperability plays a big part in this. Obviously, the more layer one chains there are, the more variety users have to pick. And I think that's always been a big part of decentralization, at least for me, has been not just the ability to be self-sovereign, but the ability to choose. You can choose whether you want to be self-sovereign, you can choose whether you want to vote, you can choose whether you want to delegate that vote, or you can choose whether you want to lock up your tokens in an exchange because they may be better at security than you are. But until recently, you haven't really had a choice about what chain you want to use, or which security model you think is really the best one. And you're kind of stuck with Ethereum if you really want to do anything interesting. And I think now that the pain of high gas prices and sort of the time delay between now and when ETH 2.0 might be out and actually solve the gas problem is going to drive people to other chains. And now that we have real interoperability solutions out there, Cosmos obviously with its IBC, you've got THORChain with their cross-chain Uniswap, you've got Ren with a sort of more generic capability. There are plenty of options for users to move between chains. And this is great for composability. You may not necessarily get the sort of a single atomic transaction that Deniz talked about, where everything happens across all chains all at once or not, but you can still create a cascade of consequences where you only have to take one action on one chain and it will flow through the other chains. They'll trigger an event which causes something to happen on another chain, which triggers an event which causes something to happen on another chain. So from the perspective of the user, they can still get a very composable experience, albeit the specifics of how we do that might be a little more janky.
When do you think we will be kind of when should we start seeing the first glimpses of stuff realistic stuff becoming usable and coming out on other layer twos? And I guess and what would be the first one essentially to realistically compete with Ethereum?
If I had to take a bet, I would say Polkadot, just because they're there with it, and their solution is not too dissimilar to ETH 2.0. So anyone who is okay with the ETH 2.0 proposal should be more or less okay with Polkadot's model, at least satisfied enough to use it before ETH 2.0 comes around. I think conservatively next year, we should be able to start seeing truly multi-chain apps where maybe a single application actually resides on multiple chains.
Got it. Exciting. JP, I remember you shared some opinions last time about Polkadot being a competitor or a realistic competitor to ETH. What are your thoughts on sort of what we discussed right now?
Yeah, so Polkadot and Cosmos are two networks and ecosystems that are competitive and getting traction, but with two different security models. So Cosmos is bring your own security. Polkadot is buy your security with the DOT token. It's mandatory. So we're yet to actually see what that means for network effects. I think Cosmos SDK is going to be a bit like Linux because it's free, open source, works great, used everywhere. THORChain, Ren use it. Then the bet is, will all these chains start to use IBC to connect, and which will be the main hub that they go through? That's the only long-term plan for the Atom token to accrue value, being a IBC relayer between chains. as a center hub. But if REN is the most economically significant, or THORChain is, then or Binance Chain is also the Cosmos-based chain, then that chain will be the hub, and that value accrual or relaying IBC packets will go to that chain instead. Whereas Polkadot is you buy DOT tokens in order to get your parachain to rent security. And so I think DOT has a much more convincing value retention because it's direct plan. What that means for scalability, I don't know yet. I do think that 1,000 Cosmos chains is more scalable than 1,000 parachains, if that's even possible, because they will naturally form the best graph possible to relay the IBC packets. Whereas Polkadot, I just don't see how that could work yet. So yeah, we'll see how we go. I wouldn't, the THORChain team are obviously betting big on Cosmos because it's fit for purpose. They needed a state machine. Cosmos SDK works great as a state machine. To be seen.
What about Solana?
Yeah, so Project Serum is being a big project that everyone knows here probably, that's building on Solana. Solana use a very interesting proof of history. Essentially, it's recursive SHA-256 hashing, which is not parallelizable. So once you hash one bit of entropy, then you hash that, and you can only hash that in just a long chain. So you can't parallelize it. So they think it's resistant to ASICs and things that befall ASIC mining. Although the limit is the limit to Solana's to prevent Solana becoming just a proof of work chain, which it could, is the idea that you can't parallelize it, and we're already at the kind of the point of diminishing returns of chip design. So that it's going to cost 20 billion to build a faster chip in order to do those computations. That will kind of prevent Solana becoming just an ASIC mined proof of work chain. But if proof of history does work and recursive SHA-256 mining does work, then Solana could be, it's a very unique model. There's no sharding. It's very, very unique. So you could potentially hedge
they still have a PBFT based system built around it though, don't they?
Yeah, they do need a verifiable delay function on chain. So that's the other thing that I'm a little bit dubious on. Verifiable delay functions. I'm just highly dubious that you can actually create intrinsic entropy using on-chain VDF that can't be gamed in a way. The biggest example of this to come is going to be the beacon chain on v2.0. We'll see if it works. So we'll see.
Deniz, how is this gas problem going to be solved?
Hopefully layer 2, and in 10 years time, ETH 2.0 phase 2 or whatever. Or I don't know, there's still like open questions around how we solve it and how we're all going to migrate to ETH 2.0 to fix the scaling. Or it's hard to tell what the landscape will look like in a year or 2 years time. I mean, we're seeing some of the stuff offload of Ethereum onto OMG, for example, with Tether. So if the gas cost, if low value transactions can be moved to layer 2, and only the most high value ones will remain back on ETH. So we have almost like an execution layer with all these layer 2, and just the settlement happens on Ethereum. I mean, that could work as well, but it seems a bit clunky compared to what all these other projects are doing with cross-chain compatibility. But I'm not sure how it's going to play out in the next 6-12 months. I'm just hoping like whatever the path of least resistance is to lowering the transaction fees, that's what will happen.
I guess in some ways it has sort of forced everyone to think, more economically as well, right? But ultimately, the sort of the pushers of the gas prices have been basically, I think, once like the next version of YAM launches, it's again going to be gas to 400.
Yeah. I mean, that's what worried me about, this whole adoption thing we're talking about. If we onboarded another 100,000 people, it would clog up the system. We had crypto kitties from 2 years ago, and we barely moved since then. So I don't know how this plays out once Ethereum becomes more popular in the next bull market and more developers come in. That's why I see so many other competitors having a pretty decent chance of expanding the space in that direction.
Do you have a particular favorite layer 2 solution? Because there's now, there's so many new coming out basically every week.
No, I mean, I haven't really dived deep enough into it to know like the nuances of all the different optimistic rollups and this and ZK snarks and everything. So, I mean, each one has great teams behind it. So I don't know. It's great that we're having like a dozen different things, and we'll see which one actually is efficient, effective enough, and has good product market fit to carry that banner.
Loong, I think you being the only CTO here, what is your do you have a particular preference on out of the, how many do we have, how many layer 2 solutions do we have coming out right now?
I would say my favorite at the moment is probably the ZK Star sort of direction. I think some combination between that and a rollup is likely to be able to alleviate some pain in the short term. I think mostly because it has.
Maybe you could explain a little bit into to layman's terms what makes it stand out.
I think one of the things that makes it stand out is you don't necessarily have to have like an entirely new network that you need to worry about the security of the nodes. I mean, if you move your assets into a layer 2, you do have to worry about the security concerns of the layer 2 and the security concerns of the bridge between those two systems. There are a lot of different models that try and approach this in a different way. A ZK Stark I like because at the end of the day, it can just be run by one person, and you can just have one guy with a mega machine chunking through thousands of transactions per second, or the approximate equivalent of, and posting that data back on chain, and you can be damn sure that those calculations are correct. And then I think you can optimize between those moments where you actually need a precise moment to know that everything is correct, and in those gaps you can just be optimistic and just let them post hashes of what they claim the state is, and then at some point they prove it with the Stark. I've been chatting a lot with the Starkware team, and they have some really cool technology coming up very soon, I think, and I'm excited to see if and how that makes a difference.
Is high gas particularly relevant for Ren as well, like in terms of the operation of Ren's essentially blockchain?
Not of Ren itself. So Ren takes the decision of not actually taking action on chains. It just authorizes the ability to take action on chains. It takes very few actions on chain itself. It does have an impact on us in the sense that when someone wants to move an asset from the Bitcoin chain to the Ethereum chain, they have to pay all of these associated fees. And of course, one of the fees is minting the tokenized representation. And if gas prices are 400 pop, then that's starting to look very expensive. And so what ends up happening is people move it in bulk, and then they keep it there on Ethereum, and they just let it sit there. And that's very dangerous for everyone, really. It's dangerous for RenVM because it's not generating fees. It's dangerous for Bitcoin because if you offload all of the Bitcoin from that network to Ethereum, then the Bitcoin chain has no opportunity to generate fees itself. And it's dangerous for Ethereum because if either of those two other networks collapse and you're using this Bitcoin as collateral in a liquidity pool or for DAI or whatever, then suddenly all of those dependent ecosystems collapse as well. So I think once interoperability comes into the picture, high gas prices can become a little bit of an issue, can sort of start becoming a security issue, not just a usability issue.
And I think Deniz mentioned that this gas situation is becoming like an obstacle to essentially adoption. I remember myself as well, like a couple of weeks ago, and like YAM had just come out. I was trying to do something completely unrelated, but it's just Ethereum over a couple of days became this, like, it was literally the most expensive financial service I've ever used, which it doesn't feel like the future of money anymore. But like, what do you guys see as the when talking about DeFi, for example, what do you see as the sort of biggest risk right now? Would it be something like so smart contract risk obviously is something that I guess we are every day, as this TVL or volumes and all these metrics increase, we're reaching all-time highs of basically peak smart contract risk technically, or is it something around regulatory? Are they going to catch up with uniswapping sort of practices, or
humans love
what do you think, Wang?
humans love one answer, but I think the reality is that it's a little bit of all of that. And those risks kind of aggregate together. The point you raise about sort of adoption is kind of interesting. Everyone that I have tried to onboard into the DeFi space, either successfully or not successfully, have not tripped up at the moment of interacting with Ethereum in terms of like using a wallet. It's been almost everything in the lead up to that. Like, how do they actually get a hold of their first crypto? How do you explain the concept of a wallet? A lot of it is actually the philosophical or sort of maybe like general education layer. You know, we're kind of back in the days of trying to teach people that a computer is a thing and you can control it with this like mouse. We're at the sort of financial equivalent of that. I think that in itself is a huge risk to DeFi, not being able to actually accrue huge levels of liquidity and onboard all of this retail. Personally, I think that reputation plays a big part in all of this. And, you know, I wasn't super stoked to see YAM come out. It was just a matter of time before something went wrong. And it was just basically, you weren't praying for something not to go wrong. You were praying for it to not go so badly wrong that everyone lost their money. And I think we're lucky as a community that it went the way that it did. And hopefully when it breaks next time, it's equally safe or equally okay.
Yeah, I don't know where this, I guess maybe. So I was just going to add, I don't know where this trend came for, like this craziness where people just launch something and say, I haven't audited, no audits, but don't put your money in, knowing full well that $500 million is going to be locked in because people are so greedy and desperate for it. And then it does go down. Every time it keeps going down. And this is like, it's making me so uncomfortable. And
each time people think it's going to be different.
Sorry?
Each time people think it's going to be different, even though they're saying it's going to be different.
It's because, no. It's honestly because Andre Condé was, you know, I test him prod, and he kind of set the example for everyone else to follow him because, you know, obviously successful at launching Yearn, and he's obviously a magician, but you know his tagline kind of gave the wrong kind of direction to other DeFiers that were following him, and you know, no audits, just throw it out straight out in production, and yeah.
I think the difference there was though that my impression of his approach was that he was ultimately building a tool that he wanted to use and other people could come and use it too if they wanted. Whereas the system with YAM was kind of like, we're going to build a system for other people, but we're going to tell them not to use it. Like,
yeah, that's true.
That's clearly not actually your
intention.
Didn't
they also dump tokens onto the users at some point?
I don't know or necessarily even care about that. I just think like the claim to say this is unaudited, don't use it, but it's an experiment, then who are you thinking is going to anticipate, like, is going to partake in this experiment? It's got to be somebody, right? I think it's unauthentic to do it the way that it was done. But I think Andre does it in a much more authentic way.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not Andre's fault that the valuations are so out of whack. You know, we're talking about valuations in the billions for a governance token. Like, how can that vote be worth? I think it's 99% speculation, less than 1% fundamental value being drive for the whole ecosystem. I don't know if you guys see more value in that. Maybe I'm missing it, but it just seems to
maybe
be a lot of
more than
speculation.
1%, but certainly not in the billions yet.
Yeah, for unproven, unaudited, 1-month-old projects at the end of the day.
Who is creating fundamental value the most? You can't say Kyber. Do you think right now?
I haven't really thought about. I mean, okay, like projects like Maker who are providing actual service, like the lending, like the borrowing. Everyone's providing some kind of fundamental value at varying degrees. I think over longer times, that fundamental value is gradually growing up collectively as well, and you know, network effects keep multiplying up. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to assign value to that fundamental value and say, oh, yep, this one has the most fundamental value.
Got it. What do you think, Loong?
Well, as opposed to right now, I don't know. I think a lot of valuations are super inflated. But I think in general, to be honest, still Coinbase and Binance, I think, have provided in aggregate the most value to this space so far. None of this ecosystem, DeFi, would exist without them, because they made it possible to actually get involved and to be liquid, and to not necessarily have to own your own crypto straight away, and still be involved in the system. And even if you do own your own crypto, until very recently, it was beyond the shadow of a doubt that the easiest place to be liquid was to at least temporarily move your tokens into the exchange and do your business there, and then move them back out. And it's such a fundamental value that they provide to the ecosystem in that sense.
Got it. And I think we mentioned that the sort of running out of time here, but my last question to all of you would be, we all agreed that valuations are out of whack. Everything's pretty crazy. What's different from 2017? Why is this time different? What do you think, Loong?
There's at least some fundamental value here right now. There's real yield to be generated, at just using my own project as an example. Ren, its current valuations for its dark nodes are yielding them 4 to 5%, right? Of other tokens as well. As Deniz is saying, it's not just like a self-fulfilling value thing. It's they're getting Bitcoin and they're getting Zcash and they're getting Bitcoin Cash. These are real hard cryptocurrencies. That's not an out of whack valuation. It can get out of whack certainly, but and if you were trying to account for some crazy future growth that you expect the project to have, then maybe the valuation could go higher. If you don't think it's going anywhere, maybe the valuation is fine or it could go lower. But there is something there, and the same with Aave and Maker and Compound. There's a real value in being able to borrow and lend and leverage. And these kind of things they weren't really, or they had only just become a thing in 2017, or there were promises of a thing in 2017.
Because there was nothing usable in 2017, right? It was only, we're going to decentralize the dentist industry, right?
Yeah. But even the, few projects that were around, they didn't have anything to integrate with, right? So it's like, okay, you could borrow something, but for what purpose could you borrow this thing? Now we've got enough projects that you can borrow something and move it into another place and generate yield.
Yeah, I mean,
Got it.
17 was pure hype, like as pure as it gets. Whereas now we do have like an infrastructure layer, like we do have like you guys, THORChain, like REN protocol. I don't know if it existed 3 years ago, but now it's so far down the development line, then those tools have so much value for that next, like as a springboard to the next level of the massive developers coming in and building stuff and building liquidity pools and everything on top of that. I think that's one of the main differences between 3 years ago.
Yeah. 2017 was just pure hype. Whereas 2020, the infrastructure is being built out. You can lend, you can borrow, you can make yield. Cross-chain is around the corner. So you're not going to see that 2017 nonsense. You're going to see certain aspects as similar, but you're not going to see it to the same degree as 2017. The other thing as well is, we're barely even scratching the surface. 6 billion, and even that's 50% overcounted. So probably close to 3 billion total capital locked up in DeFi. And there's a few protocols not counted like Kyber, but that's 3 billion out of 300 billion, 1% of where we could go in terms of, and I'm certainly don't believe that the market cap's going to stay 300 billion for much longer. I think it could easily 10x over the next 2 years to 3 trillion even. So then the DeFi bubble, if there is, call that, will go from 3 billion locked to, who knows, 30 billion, 100 billion locked. When we get to those levels and 10 to 20% of the entire cap, then we're at, top of that bubble. But I still think that's, the thing is there's inertia this time around. Last time there wasn't inertia, money pumped into ICOs, founders dumped the ETH, away we went. But this time there's inertia. Money doesn't go directly into ICOs. The capital flow is into these lending pools and liquidity pools, liquidity tokens. Now it has inertia and now wants to stay. So it's not going to merely get dropped like it was in 2017. So I think it's going to be a lot more sustainable. So the key metric I'd be watching is the total value locked compared with the rest of the market, and any signs of exhaustion, probably in the 18-month mark with the wider market. So, and then even then, will it pop as hard as it did? Who knows? Depends on how high it goes. But I think this time around, you're not going to have like illiquid order books on Binance and BitMEX you're going to have we're going to see $1 billion liquidity pool sometime soon. It's probably going to be on Curve Finance. And $1 billion in a liquidity pool to move the price by 10%, well, even Curve's liquidity amplification, take Uniswap. If there's $1 billion Uniswap liquidity pool, to move the price by 10% requires $100 million of on-chain capital to go in one direction. And you can't fake that. So as these liquidity pools grow and absorb this capital, it just means it's going to provide market inertia by the time for that bubble to pop. And I think we're going to be let down a lot more easier this time.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I think we all agree that sort of this industry has never sort of been so exciting to be in. I know you guys are obviously super busy, so thank you so much for taking the time. Looking forward to hopefully doing this again, seeing where the things are around us and where you guys have gotten to. And thanks so much for your time again.
Thanks very much, guys.
Cheers, guys. Bye.